Learn Efficient Pharmacology, Pharmacokinetics Part 10, Drug Metabolism Clinical Scenarios. By now, we have seen many important principles in drug metabolism. To understand how these principles are practically relevant, let's see an example of a drug that we all are familiar with and perhaps have ourselves consumed for fever or pain. Acetaminophen, also known as paracetamol. The first phase of drug metabolism is functionalization. That is, a functional group is introduced or unmasked so that the drug can be conjugated. But if you look at the structure of acetaminophen, it already has such a functional group. So, acetaminophen can directly enter phase 2. Here, it is conjugated with glucuronic acid or sulfate. And the major metabolites of acetaminophen are glucuronide and sulfate conjugates. So, does acetaminophen undergo a phase 1 reaction? Let's see. The body has to metabolize a wide variety of xenobiotics. And for this, the key phase 1 enzymes, the CYPs, have broad substrate specificity. So, there could be a CYP that can metabolize acetaminophen. Such a CYP is CYP2E1. But we just said that most of acetaminophen is directly conjugated. Then why are we discussing CYP2E1? This is because even though the fraction of acetaminophen metabolized by CYP2E1 is very small, the metabolite that is formed is highly toxic. This is N-acetyl p-benzoquinonimine or NAPQ. But acetaminophen has been used by so many for so long. If it has such a toxic metabolite, how is that possible? This is because as soon as NAPQ is formed in the liver, it is neutralized by conjugation with glutathione. If not, the highly reactive NAPQ would bind to cellular components and cause hepatocyte injury. So, under normal circumstances, most of the acetaminophen is metabolized by glucuronide or sulfate conjugation, and only a minor fraction is metabolized by CYP2E1. But what happens if the conjugation pathways are saturated? Say, for example, in acetaminophen overdose. Then, more of acetaminophen will be diverted to the CYP2E1 pathway and more of NAPQ is synthesized. Initially, this NAPQ can be neutralized by glutathione. But what would happen when the glutathione stores are eventually depleted? Then, there is no way for the body to prevent hepatocyte injury. Then what do? We have to replenish the glutathione stores before it is depleted. Now, glutathione is synthesized from 3 amino acids: glutamic acid, cysteine, and glycine. Of these, depletion of cysteine is what leads to glutathione depletion. However, cysteine cannot be administered as such. One of the reasons is that cysteine is a polar molecule. We know that polar molecules cannot easily cross the cell membrane. So instead of cysteine, what we administer is an acetyl prodrug that can easily cross the hepatocyte membrane. This is N-acetylcysteine or NAC. N-acetylcysteine should be administered as early as possible. That is within 8 hours. Why? Because if the glutathione stores are depleted, it can lead to irreversible liver damage. So CYP2E1 is the culprit. Would inhibiting it solve the problem? Yes, it could. Due to broad substrate specificity, it is likely that CYP2E1 would metabolize other molecules too. And we do have a very familiar molecule that is metabolized by CYP2E1, ethanol or alcohol. Alcohol is primarily metabolized by alcohol and aldehyde dehydrogenases. But some of it is also metabolized by CYP2E1. In animal experiments, When ethanol was administered with acetaminophen, ethanol was shown to inhibit CYP2E1 mediated acetaminophen metabolism, and therefore NAPK induced liver damage was avoided. So, should we consume alcohol along with acetaminophen? That's not what we said. A theoretical possibility that has been proven in animal experiments. That's what we discussed. But what practically happens in humans is different. We have seen that when a greater quantity of certain xenobiotics enter the body for a longer duration, the body may induce the synthesis of enzymes that metabolize it. So, in persons with chronic alcohol consumption, induction of CYP2E1 may occur. Now imagine that such a person overdoses acetaminophen. Since CYP2E1 is already induced, more of NAPK would be formed. So the risk of hepatic injury is much more in persons with alcohol use disorder than in normal individuals. So to summarize, we saw how acetaminophen is metabolized, what happens in overdose, and how alcohol complicates these situations by inducing and inhibiting CYP2E1. These are some good to know facts.